Well, hello and welcome to the September 6, 2020 online sermon from Christian Fellowship Church. I'm Pastor Michael Matiscik, and once again, blessed to be able to come into your home via the YouTube. This is our September 6th online message, and amazingly, August is now behind us, and we're almost into fall. Summer's almost finished. And this Wednesday, for those of you who are in the area, our fall activities are kicking off. We're going to have our high school and junior high program called 180 is going to be starting off, as well as our adult Bible study. And so I would encourage you, if you're in the area, please come by and join us at 605 165th Street in Hammond, Indiana. I know many of you are still staying home because of COVID concerns, and my prayer is that you'll be able to join us soon. And whether it's health concern or some other fear that you have, we hope that soon you'll be able to get back and be with us, not only on Wednesdays, but Sunday mornings as well. And this coming Sunday is September 6th, like I've already said, and tomorrow, the next day, will be Labor Day. So I hope you all have a blessed Labor Day. Really surprised that so many people will be working on Labor Day. I guess that is more of our culture. I've been talking to a few people and realizing that people work so much now on Labor Day. And I was surprised to find out that my son will be having college classes on Labor Day as well. And again, all to me indicative of the fact that our culture has changed when so many people used to have that day off. But no matter what, sure hope you have a blessed Labor Day. Now, if you will, please open your Bibles to the book of Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. We're going to be there in a moment. In our study today, what we are going to be doing is continuing our end times study by specifically looking at the subject matter of how close we are to the rapture. And once again, we'll have sent out sermon notes to those who regularly attend our church. We're looking at the subject matter, how close are we to the rapture? This is our fourth study in this. And we're going to have a little briefer study because we're going to have communion on Sunday. But what we are going to do, I hope, is give you a lot of information about the subject matter of how close we are to the rapture. And we're also going to talk a little bit about the Antichrist today. And then I want to get into just a brief side note that will deal with the timing of the rapture in a second. But first, let's just remember, as we talk about the Antichrist is the ultimate evil villain. We've done an extensive study on this in the past. I'm going to try and see if we can find the podcast to be able to put it up on the website. But from that study, we learned that he's a terrifying figure. And we're not going to be looking at him specifically, but one of his actions. We are going to, in general, talk about him. And I want to emphasize that when we study him and we look at him, we're not looking at an imaginary figure. He is a real person. He's not imaginary like a Darth Vader from Star Wars. I think Darth Vader is the ultimate space villain, ultimate futuristic space villain. But remember, a little side note, Star Wars trivia is that Star Wars isn't from the future, it's from the past. Remember, long, long ago. But Star Wars dealt with this Darth Vader as this horrible villain. And if you can imagine, the Antichrist is going to be far worse than a Darth Vader. He will be a real villain, and he won't be imaginary in any way. But I can joke about Darth Vader. I don't know if I can joke about the Antichrist. Here are two jokes for you about Darth Vader. So just so that you can see there's humor in Darth Vader. The first one is this. Do you know where Darth Vader buys his clothes? The Death Store. See, for those of you who are Star Wars fans, you know that he built a Death Star. So now he goes to the Death Store. All right. So one more time. Where does he buy his clothes? The Death Store. Here's a better one. I made this one up. Do you know that Darth Vader had a wife that invented a device that is used in every tall building? It was named after her. And once you know her name, I think you'll always remember that. Her name was Ella. Whole name, Ella Vader. All right. So whenever you go into an elevator, you'll remember. Okay. Well, the Antichrist Antichrist is not imaginary. He's a real villain, and he will be the worst villain over all real villains that have ever existed, be it a Hitler or a Nero, a Stalin, or a Jack the Ripper. And in no way, shape, or form, he is a imaginary figure. And he will appear in the tribulation. And before that tribulation starts, I believe, will be raptured. And I want it to be very clear that this event occurs before the tribulation starts. Now, we have done some previous videos on this subject matter, and I said that we were done with it, but I have been talking to a few people in our congregation, and the reality of it is I feel a few questions, and they're good questions, but I can see that some people have some confusion. And so I wanted to just address that. I want you to know that if you have any questions, I'll try to be as patient with you as possible. But you, I hope, will come to an understanding as to the reality that the tribulation will occur after the church has been raptured. And so let me just talk to you about one point. So you might want to just flip your sermon notes over or something like that, just to go through this one point that I want to completely make clear to you that's come up from several of my conversations. And that point is that there are no precursors to the rapture occurring. Now, why is that important? Well, I stated that before, but I think it's really become clear to me that this could be something that many people are confused on. We look at the rapture and we concluded that it is an imminent event. It is something that can happen at any time. Hence, there's no precursors. And if you have the tribulation happen, start, or have the abomination of desolation, which is in the middle, or some event that declares God's wrath, or even the end, any of those things become precursors. And then all of a sudden you would know that the rapture is soon to happen. But the idea of the rapture is that there are no precursors. It can happen at any time. It is far different than the second coming. So again, the rapture can happen at any time. And the rapture is not the second coming. If you think that they're the same event, then you study a passage like we're going to look at here in a second in Matthew 24, and you think that we're talking about the rapture, and then you become confused. And so the second coming, get this, does have precursors. And that's even when Jesus tells us that nobody knows the day or the hour of his return. He's talking about the season of his return. But once you know the middle of the tribulation, you know almost to the exact day that he will return. And I want to show you this when we look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 36. Remember, verse 36 says this. Look at, it says in Matthew 24, verse 36, "But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father alone." Now he's talking about the second coming. And if you just read that verse without reading it in context, you think, wow, we can never predict a date. Well, that's true regarding the season, the time of when it's going to occur. But let's look at this in context. Jesus has been talking, I believe, about his second coming. And he says this in verse 32. "Now learn the parable from the fig tree." This is a parable. This is a story that has spiritual truth that's going to be thrown alongside some physical reality. So verse 32 says, "Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near." So when this tree begins to put out its leaves, you know that something is about to happen. "So you too know when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door." Wait a second, I just thought Jesus said nobody knows the day or the hour. But in the very same context, he's saying, wait a second, you'll know. So he says, "Truly I say to you, this generation," I believe the generation he's been talking about that is going through the tribulation, "will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone." So in the context, I believe he's saying you won't know the actual season, But when you see the other things happening, then you'll know. So there's two things being talked about. Sort of like, well, will it happen in 2020 or will it happen in 2050? You don't know if it happens in the first century, the second century, when it's going to happen. But when things start to kick off, then you're going to know that it's time. That's when you apply the parable. So verse 37, for the coming of the Son of Man will be just like in the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until that day Noah entered the ark. And they didn't understand until the flood came and took them away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man be. There will be a sense where people will be being warned, but they're not going to actually know when this entire season gets kicked off, when it all gets started. And so what happens is the coming of the Son of Man will be like the days of Noah. Well, Noah was warning people that it was coming. He was warning that they were coming. But once things happened, at least for the flood, excuse me, once things happened for the flood, boom, the rains came, and it was said and done. Verse 32, the parable is telling you that, I believe, once you see the actual birth pangs, the mid-trib, abomination of desolation, then we'll know that it's real close, right? So why this challenge of, hey, it's real close, but you don't know when? Because I think, again, he's talking about the season in verse 36, but then to the awareness of once these things all kick off, then you're to be aware of it. And so those things are precursors, which would lead to the second coming. And so my hope is that you recognize this and that you understand that this passage needs to be understood in light of the fact that there are precursors. There are things that tell us, wow, these things have happened, and hence the second coming is right around the corner. But for the rapture, there's no rapture in this text, hence why the rapture has no precursors. Matthew 24 has nothing about the rapture in it. And if you think it does, that's why you get confused. All right? So, then why in the world are we talking about how near we are to the rapture? That's been our subject matter over our 3 previous studies. This is our 4th one. Well, because what we're trying to get you to understand is that when we look at the events in the tribulation, it helps us speculate. It helps us say, wait a second, a lot of the pieces are really coming together. Now, I've shared this even with someone this week. I said, look, none of these things that we've studied, and we've already studied 9 of them, are necessary for the rapture to happen. Every one of them can happen after we're raptured. And one of the things I think people make a mistake is they think the rapture starts the tribulation. It doesn't. You can have the rapture and we can have a year, 5 years, 10 years go by, and then all of these things could have come to fruition and really blossom. And that might be what happens with the rebirth of the Roman Empire. There is no definite time between the rapture and the start of the tribulation. We just know what starts the tribulation is the signing of the peace treaty from Daniel chapter 9. But time-wise, there's never been a definite time period that's been given. And I think it's important that people understand that. So what I'm saying, though, is there are things that have happened, like Israel's regathered in the land. The work to rebuild the temple is started. We know that there's efforts to rebuild the Roman Empire. We know that the countries of Magog are all lined up to attack Israel. So if you take your sheets and you look at all 9 of those reasons, or you go back and listen to some of those podcasts, you will begin to understand, wait a second, there's events that are going to happen in the tribulation. We're seeing seeds of them now. Wow, perhaps we are close. And again, I just want to have people prepared. I want them to be thinking about the awareness that we are getting closer. And obviously, every day gets us closer to the rapture of the church. Every day gets us closer to these events of end times coming together. But there has to be a heightened awareness because of what we're seeing in the world today. So let's get into reason number 10. And reason number 10, if you'll fill in the blank, is the fact that we see that the Antichrist ability to control buying and selling on a worldwide scale is here. So fill in the blank with the word to control, to be able to be in charge. And the Antichrist is able to determine when anyone could buy and sell in Revelation 13. So turn your Bibles to the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and here's a text of scripture that is about the Antichrist. It's one of the best passages on the Antichrist in the Bible. It's not the only one. There's numerous passages on the Antichrist. And when we talk about Antichrist, we are talking about an individual that is against Christ. But in this text, he's not called the Antichrist. He's called the Beast. It's one of his many names. And I'm going to go through the different names that he is given. But let's look at verses 16 to 18. It says, and he, and I believe it's talking about the Antichrist, causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free man and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. So on their right hand or on their forehead, this mark, we don't know what that mark is. There's all kinds of speculations. And maybe it is a tattoo, maybe it is a UPC symbol. Anyone that says they definitively know are just speculating in the sense that they're saying, I think it's this. And I want to say it could be good speculations, but we're not going to actually know until the end, when it actually occurs. But verse 17 says, and he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. And here is wisdom. Let him who is understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So you see that in verse 17, he will be able to tell someone if they can buy something or if they can't. He will be able to control buying and selling. You have to have his mark to be able to buy and sell. And so what is this mark? We don't know. But what is clear in the scripture is what he's able to do. And my point is that when we look at the Antichrist, what he's able to do is here. Because we live in a day and age when we have credit cards and we have cell phones that have our credit cards on them. And if somebody were to turn those off and someone were to put chips in us to say you can only use a credit card that's in your hand or on your forehead, then absolutely they can control buying and selling. You say, well, this has been around for a long time. But my point is, in 95 AD, all right, then when John wrote this, absolutely this would have seemed ridiculous. But now it's here. And this one who is called the Beast is able to do this. And let's just look at a little bit more about who he is. Verse 13, and the dragon, which I think is Satan, stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and his great authority. The beast is the Antichrist, and he is the amalgamation of all the world powers from an earthly perspective. Remember, Daniel chapter 7 described him in that way. And so he is like a king is like a kingdom. And as the king represents his kingdom, and it can be described as one of these vicious animals, he is also able to be described as one of those vicious animals. So verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. So we believe perhaps someone will shoot the Antichrist, realizing who he is. They'll try to kill him thinking, oh, I've defeated the Antichrist, but he will he will be supernaturally empowered to have a resurrection. And I say it's only fake in the sense that it is not the same resurrection of Jesus Christ. He'll maybe present it as such when he goes into the temple and declares himself to be God. That's a possibility. We know from 2 Thessalonians 2, that's exactly what he does. He declares himself to be God. But he's going to have this fatal wound healed. He is going to talk about how he's defeated life, death, and come back to life. So verse 4, they worship the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast and who is able to wage war with him? I believe people are going to worship Satan because of his ability to represent Satan. He will be the beast, and he will have the dragon's authority. And verse 5, there was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given them, half the tribulation. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was given to them to make war with the saints, to overcome them, and authority over every tribe and people and tongue was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him. Remember that expression from Revelation chapter 3. The Church of Philadelphia is to be removed from the testing for those who come and dwell upon the earth. So we believe that's an expression for unbelievers. Remember, it was tied to the Old Testament. All who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. And if anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance in the faith of the saints. So basically it's challenging you. You're going to stand either with God or you're going to stand with the Antichrist. And if you stand with him, you will face judgment. And so when we go through this passage, he isn't called Antichrist anywhere in this text. But where do we get that from? Well, from the book of 1 John and I think 2 John, John uses that description only 5 times. Only 5 times is this evil person, this evil villain called the Antichrist. One who's either against Christ or one who is in replace of Christ. And why we think of in the sense that he fakes this resurrection, Satan does it anyway, that he replaces Christ and that he is the ultimate one who has beaten death, when in actuality it's nothing but a lie. It's a satanic trick. If you're going to do an in-depth study of the Antichrist, I would highly encourage you to start off with the names of the Antichrist. And I have found in my study that there are 16 different names of the Antichrist. 16. Obviously, number 1 would be Antichrist. But let me just read these off to you. And if somebody would like this list in a way that I can give you all the references, I'll email it to you. But just get a feel for who he is. He is, number 1, the Antichrist. Genesis 3, he's called the seed of Satan. Number 3, he is called the little horn in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 8, he's called the king of fierce countenance. He's also called the prince that shall come in Daniel chapter 9. He's called the desolator also in Daniel 9. He's called the willful king from Daniel 11. He's called the man of sin in 2 Thessalonians 2. He's called the son of perdition in 2 Thessalonians 2. He's called the lawless one in 2 Thessalonians 2:8. He's called the beast in Revelation 11 and Revelation 13. He's called the Assyrian in Isaiah 14. A lot of times people miss this one, that he's called the Assyrian in Isaiah 14. It's believed that he's called the first horseman from Revelation 5. He's called the wicked one from 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-8. He's called the idle shepherd of Zechariah 11. He's called the vile person of Daniel 11. And he is the one who comes in his own name, according to John 5:43. Here's just a few key points about him. He will be the signer of the peace treaty, according to Daniel 9:24-27. He will be of European descent, according to Daniel 9:24-27. He might have a withered arm and be blind in the right eye, or it might just be descriptive of how he loses power and his ability to control everything, according to Zechariah 11:17. He does have this number 666 that Revelation 13 talks about, but we won't know what officially that number represents until end times. He resurrects from a mortal head wound, as Revelation 13 has already alluded to. He will claim to be God, according to the abomination of desolation that we see described in Daniel chapter 9, Matthew chapter 24, and 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And so he will claim to be God. We believe that's the abomination of desolation. But as we've been stating, his one key thing that we're focusing on is his ability to control all buying and selling. And I want to make it clear that I don't know how it's going to happen, but we've just gone through this COVID situation, and we have seen how there could be a worldwide shutdown of economies and a worldwide control. And we need to be aware that this ability that the Antichrist is going to somehow tap into, or maybe take it to a degree that we're not even sure of, with an actual chip in your hand or in your forehead. These are all possibilities. We laugh about the fact that our dogs are chipped now. You lose your dog, and you're hoping that someone would find it and take it to a chip center, and they can scan it, and they will be able to contact you so that your dog is found. Well, obviously they can put chips in human beings as well. But will that be the mark? I don't know. Will the mark be some type of a body formation that occurs because you took some vaccine? I mean, I want people to understand that's a possibility. A vaccine that requires you to give allegiance to the Antichrist. And so all of that is possible. But what I want you to emphasize is the fact that in 95 AD, this really wasn't something that seemed that feasible. You might have laughed about it. You're 95 AD, you're sitting in Ephesus, you get the book of Revelation, and you're saying, how in the world could somebody control buying and selling? Now, obviously God might have been able to make that happen. Maybe it would have been a supernatural power if the Antichrist came in 100 AD. But obviously he didn't. And what we're seeing as life has played out is that human technology has advanced in such a way that the technology is here. And you should be saying, wow, this is something that I can see in 2020 that someone could do it. And no one ever saw a centralized distribution center like we have with an Amazon in our present day. And no one could foresee the computer chips or the credit cards being able to be implanted back in 95 AD. But it's all here. And I just want you to leave today thinking of this reality that this is something the Antichrist will pull off in the end times. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form, credit cards or UPC is it now, but what will be happening is one day he's going to make something happen to control buying and selling. And so I don't believe we need any new technology to come on the scene. I believe everything is here. And that is what I want to challenge you. Do you believe it's here as well? Yes, I believe the rapture is very near, and I'm challenging you that you should as well. So yes, in conclusion, the Antichrist should be feared more than Darth Vader. And the Darth Vader could be considered a joke, but the Antichrist isn't. And the Antichrist is real. This one that is coming against Christ is very real. And he will be able to stop buying and selling. And as I want to continue to challenge all of you, is to absolutely wake up, be ready. We're seeing all of these events that I have listed on our study sheets come to fruition. We're seeing end times come together theologically as people are able to start seeing how things in Daniel are able to be true today, and things in Matthew and things in Ezekiel and things in Isaiah are coming true today. We're seeing the fact that Israel's already regathered in land. We're seeing that Israel's ready to rebuild the temple. We're seeing the rebirth of the Roman Empire. We're seeing that Israel continues to have a Western peacemaker between the Jews and the Arabs. We've seen the rise of the countries of Magog that have come up, and they're Muslim and they're anti-Jewish. We have seen how the apostasy of the church has already started. And we've seen how there are weapons of mass destruction that have been on the scene for a while now. But it just all adds up when you put it all together. And lastly, we saw how the ability to watch the two saints that were killed worldwide will be seen by the world after the evil world kills them. And so with this couple today, the 10th reason, we see the Antichrist's ability to control buying and selling on a worldwide scale. And so I want to make sure that you all are ready, and we're concerned about the people that we love, because unless a person is born again, as Jesus says, they don't go into the kingdom of heaven. The only way you get into the kingdom of heaven, the only way you get to be born again is by believing the gospel, by placing your faith in Jesus Christ. And I just want you to listen to these passages about the end of time with the Antichrist that are true for all who don't believe. These are passages that are a warning. Revelation 19 verses 20 and 21 says this: "And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet, who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with brimstone, and the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh." Listen, the Antichrist loses. Darth Vader lost. You better believe the Antichrist loses. He gets thrown into the lake of fire, and we're going to see in this next passage, everyone that is on his team goes there too. Because Revelation 21, verse 5 to 8 says this: "And he who sits on the throne says, Behold, I'm making all things new. And he said, Write, for these words are faithful and true." Basically, you can count on them. Verse 6, "Then he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of the water of life without cost. He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." Well, that's exactly where the Antichrist was thrown. And I don't think any of you want to be with him. He's a loser. And so I just want to challenge you. Are you ready? Are the people that you loved ready? And the only way to be ready is to be a believer in Jesus Christ. So how close are we to the rapture? I believe very near. And I hope you do too. And if you do, if you really believe something, it impacts the way you act.